And welcome to No Such Thing as the News, coming to you from up the creek in Greenwich, London. My name is Dan Schreiber, and I'm sitting here with Anna Chazinski, Andrew Hunter-Murray, and James Harkin. Each week, we'll be taking a look at the most interesting things that we found in the news of the last 7 days. Now, we're not here to scare you or to make you angry or tell you what to think. We're not going to give you our opinions on Brexit, but we might, for instance, tell you that, according to a recent survey, 46% of people in Japan hide when somebody rings their doorbell. So let's begin, starting with fact number 1, and that is Andrew Hunter-Murray.
My fact is that the House of Commons has a special security measure designed to stop the gunpowder plot from ever happening again. So what happens is, before the Queen's speech, which just happened on Wednesday, there's a special ceremony where the Yeomen of the Guard, who are a special military body, search the cellars of the Houses of Parliament for gunpowder. And the thing is, they are looking with candle lanterns, which... If you're looking for gunpowder, so I'll show you quickly what they look like. These are the Yeomen of the Guard, if you can see. So they've got their lanterns there.
This is what's protecting.
Yeah. These are the last line of defence, basically. So they look around and then they don't find any, and then they say, yeah, it's all fine.
Most articles are quick to point out that the Metropolitan Police does conduct a more modern search before this.
Yeah. I wondered if they might find some dummy gunpowder that, like, a security firm had left there.
So one of the other things about the Queen's speech is Black Rod, who I'm sure most of us have heard of. It's very hard to search for him on the internet. So basically, he's a parliamentary official. He's technically called the Gentleman Usher of the Black Rod because he carries a black staff. And he's the current guy in office is called David Leakey. He does have the right to detain people inside the Houses of Parliament, or specifically inside the House of Lords, I think.
Okay, I mean, I can detain people in my house.
This is his house, and he did say, I normally hand them straight over to the police. But there was a thing in the way he said, I normally hand them straight over to the police. Sometimes I rough them up a bit.
Yeah, sometimes.
And the big thing in the news today, a lot of places went with the fact that the Queen took a lift for the first time. Did you see that?
Oh, yeah.
So
she didn't take a lift for the first time in her life.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
So normally she goes up the stairs to get to Parliament, but this time she got the lift, and it's because her knees are a bit bad. But another time that she took the lift, I think it was the first time she ever did, she wanted to go down one floor, and her and Prince Philip accidentally pressed the wrong button, and they went up one floor. Okay, so they got to the next floor, and there was a peer from the Houses of Lords kind of just opened the door, and the Queen and Prince Philip were right there in front of him. And then they just went, and they pressed the button, and then instead of going back down, they went up another floor, and they ended up in the Parliamentary Archives, okay? And so they're like, okay, they pressed the button again to go back down to the bottom floor, and ended up exactly where they started, and just walked down the stairs anyway.
That could be a heartwarming children's story. And the other thing that happens during the Queen's speech is that the palace takes a hostage MP, which is another very old-fashioned tradition. So this year it was ex-housing minister Chris Hopkins who just went to Buckingham Palace for the speech. This is supposedly in case Parliament decides we're going to keep the Queen. Then at least Buckingham Palace can say, well, we've got the ex-housing minister here.
I read an article by Ephraim Hardcastle in the Daily Mail, and they were talking about this guy who was taken hostage. So Prince Philip used to enjoy reminding the MP that if Prince Philip and the Queen never came back, then he would have his head chopped off. But the Queen said, actually, Prince Philip, it's nothing to do with you, it's only if I don't come back. And apparently Prince Philip got very angry with that and he doesn't do the joke anymore.
Wouldn't it be awful if they chopped off the MP's head and it turns out that the Queen and Prince Philip had just been in a lift?
Speaking of Prince Philip getting jealous of the Queen's superior role, I was looking into the only other Queen in the world at the moment, who is Queen Margaret of Denmark. and her husband has just resigned his position because he thinks that it's not gender equal. And so he's resigned in a strop. And he resigned earlier on this year, a couple of months ago, and he said, all the queens in the world have made their husbands king consort. Why should I be under my wife? I don't accept it. I never will. It makes me angry that I am subjected to discrimination. Because he's been campaigning to be called king for many years. No one's let him have that. And so, yeah, he's stropped off.
Oh my God. That's a marriage on some rocks.
Especially if you have to say, why should I be under my wife?
I was looking at other parliaments around the world and what's been going on in them lately, and it's, if possible, even more exciting stuff is happening in other parliaments. But one of the more exciting ones is the Ukrainian parliament at the moment. So there are brawls that break out constantly in the Ukrainian parliament, and there's a particularly bizarre one in December last year, actually, where the Ukrainian prime minister, who is called Arsenik Yatsenyuk, was dragged from his podium as he was about to give a speech. But what happened was the person who was going to drag him from the podium in protest, another MP, approached him holding a huge bouquet of roses. So there's a very awkward, confused moment where he obviously thinks, oh, that's nice, he's bringing me a bouquet, and he takes the roses, and then the guy grabs him around the crotch and starts dragging him from his podium. It's a very ignominious scene altogether. And then there's this equally awkward moment where the guy who's dragging him gets a bit distracted by another brawl that's going on to his left and just puts the Prime Minister down. And you see the Prime Minister, if you watch the footage, standing there holding this bouquet of roses, looking at all these other MPs fighting, thinking, what on earth am I supposed to do now?
Amazing. Didn't the Canadian Prime Minister get in trouble this week?
He did.
Yes.
Elbowing someone in the face?
In the torso.
Okay.
Still an elbowing.
And so the Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau, right, of Canada.
Yeah.
Right, and I think he apologised, didn't he, for elbowing
He
someone?
did,
There was a
yes.
little bit of a brawl, and he kind of turned around and elbowed someone in the chest.
If you watch the footage, he was trying to usher another MP to his seat, and the lady was behind him, he didn't see her, and so it was a little nick of the elbow. It looked like, you know, I wasn't her, I didn't feel it, but she had to leave the house for a while to recover, and her colleague, who was a fellow New Democrat MP, said, young women in this space need to feel safe to come here and to work here. Which I thought, I am as feminist as the next person, but I'm not sure that's a massive gender issue that he accidentally backed into another woman.
I've got a great fact about Canadian politics. Canadian politician Vicky Huntington received a round of applause after Parliament rejected her appeal asking to ban rounds of applause. We'll send that over to Vicky. We need to move on to our next fact soon, so anything?
The fact that the Queen, apparently one of the crown's too heavy for her to wear it all the time. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
So this is the Imperial State Crown, and it weighs 3 pounds, okay, which is the same weight as the smallest ever cat, who was called Tinker Toy, on the same weight as a human brain. So if you can imagine wearing a brain or a very small cat on your head, that's what it's like to be Queen.
Okay, it is time for fact number 2, and that is my fact. My fact this week is that the International Space Station has quadruple glazed windows. No, this is actually, I love it, A, because it's quite a mundane thing to find out about the windows of the International Space Station, but the reason we know that this week is because of Tim Peake, who tweeted a picture of one of the windows. This is it here, and this is a chip that has appeared in the window because it's been hit by a bit of debris. Fortunately, the thing that hit it was only the size of a fleck of paint. A fleck of paint, and that's the damage that it did because things are traveling at such speed in space. And apparently, if the International Space Station was hit on that window, say like by something the size of a pen lid, there would be enough energy for it to be the equivalent of a hand grenade. So it would depressurize, and we would lose potentially all of the International Space Station.
I read that the thing which caused this chip, might have been a piece of debris just a few thousandth of a millimetre in width. So I tried to find out what else is that size, and the head of a sperm is 5,000ths of a millimetre in diameter.
Which is why, you know, self-pleasuring is banned on the ISS. Very strict about that.
I don't think they do it out into space. It flies around.
They wind down the window 4 times for each glazing.
But then they're like, I know that's a silly thought, but actually they did used to eject urine and feces.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not allowed to do that anymore because exactly that was happening. Buzz Aldrin would have a poo, and it would come back at the ship and take it out because the poo. Sorry.
How many ships were lost? Due to Aldrin's flying pasties.
So it's been quite a big week generally for the ISS. So not only did we see this picture that Tim Peake tweeted about the chip in the window, but also the Monday just gone was the 100,000th orbit that the ISS has made. That's pretty extraordinary. While the International Space Station was doing its 100,000th orbit, do you know what was going on, what they were doing on board at the time?
They were just partying and having sex and going completely mental for 45 minutes.
Almost. They were testing the grip strength of mice.
So how do you do that?
I don't know. And in my head, it's because it's going around the world, the mice are going, whoa! But I don't think that's how it works.
It really is. It's not a million miles from that. What you do is you have a little machine and you have there's kind of a net on it, and you put the mouse on the net, and the mouse kind of holds on, and then you just start pulling it. And you keep pulling the mouse until it lets go, and that's how strong its grip is.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah, and the idea that the reason they're doing that is because they want to see how your muscles atrophy when you're in space.
It is so interesting. It's one of those things you never think to look into, but the day-to-day sort of mundane life of an astronaut living in space. So basic things like, did you know there's no pillows in space?
Why would you wouldn't need to rest your head
You
down,
wouldn't need
would
a
you?
pillow. I just didn't know that. I just figured that you would have a pillow at least against the wall, but apparently the best, you know when we all turn around in bed looking for the best position? Space is the best position. You just hang there. They've also got a lot of instruments up there, which, so if you remember Chris Hadfield played the David Bowie song on guitar. The guitar was brought up there. They also have a didgeridoo.
Do they?
Really?
Not seen any footage of anyone attempting a song, don't know why it's there.
Do you know how they do their laundry on the International Space Station?
No.
No.
They don't. They throw away their clothes every few weeks and burn them up in the atmosphere.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's no good way of washing your clothes, basically.
Well, obviously water is a really valuable commodity on the ISS, isn't it? And the way they recycle water and the efficiency with which they do it is incredible. So they recycle 3.6 gallons of water a day, and they recycle their own urine, of course, and they also recycle the urine of their lab rats or any lab animals they have on there. They recycle their sweat. So the majority of water that they drink or that they wash with is recycled in that way, but the ISS still needs to get topped up with some extra water every once in a while. And the tech magazine called alpha.com worked out the cost of your average bottle of water on the ISS, and I've worked out that it would buy you 1,400 pints of beer in London. £7,000 for one bottle of water.
One more thing on water on the International Space Station. I'm quoting here. It is inevitable that American astronauts will have consumed Russian wee, and Russian astronauts will have consumed American wee, which is pretty much a first in international relations.
Going back to testing mice's grips, really interestingly, the latest consignment of experimental gear to the International Space Station was in March this year, and they sent gecko pads. So they've been doing a lot of experiments on Earth into what makes geckos stick to walls, and so now they've created these pads which they're sending to space to help them experiment with. But I sometimes do think that if you're on the ISS, it kind of reminds me of if you go to a shop to get milk and then your friend calls you and is like, can you just get this and that and that? Like, they deliver 1,000 scientific experiments and they're like, while you're up there, do you mind testing these gecko pads and then putting mice really hard on the wall? And then
We'd like you to learn the didgeridoo. That's the big challenge this week.
I was thinking of what they could make the windows out of to make it a bit better. And have you seen this week? They've made see-through wood.
What?
It's amazing. Okay, I've got a picture here. I'm going to show you it. There you are.
You won't be able to see it.
Now,
A slight flaw in the...
well, you can tell it's wood because it has the word wood written on it. There you go. No, it's amazing. What they've done is they kind of put it in water and they put a lot of chemicals in and they get rid of the lignite, which is the stuff that gives it the colour, and then they can it just makes this wood see-through. And they've only done like 5 inches by 5 inches, but they think in the future we might be able to make windows out of this and all sorts of stuff. Because actually glass is a kind of thing that shatters quite easily, but wood is a much better substance for some things.
Could you have invisible tables? That's the extent of my imagination. What's made of wood? Well, what am I sitting behind?
You could get invisible trees that are made out of wood.
Yes.
Wow.
A whole forest no one could see.
You would spend your entire walk through a forest going, whoa, jeez. What was that? Whoa, jeez.
I can't see the wood or the trees.
Okay, so we're halfway through. It's time to look at the stories you've sent in to us via tweets, emails. Guys, what do you got?
This was tweeted to us from Katie Gibson, and the fact is that a person called Pope McCorkle III has won the 2016 Name of the Year competition. This is a real person. Pope McCorkle III is a public policy professor at Duke University.
I remember that one. I remember that one because I really wanted Sweet Orifice to win.
Sweet Orifice is a real person who unbelievably did not win. And another of the finalists was called Tillman Buttersack. Beautiful.
Okay, so we got this one from @NinjaZoo. And this is from Northern Territory News. Firemen had to be called to an Australian hospital after a man got his penis stuck in a spanner.
Stuck in a spanner?
They used a tiny angle grinder to cut the spanner away.
Please, could you leave the word tiny out of the press release? Please. I like this. People may have seen this story, but it's so good. This was sent in from Chris Emerson, and it was from The Independent, and it is the fact that students at the University of East Anglia have been told they can't throw mortarboards at their graduation, but they can mime the action and have the hats photoshopped in for an extra £8.
You got one guy going like that, and a girl next to, I can't afford to do that. Okay, it is time to move on to our third fact of the show, and that is Anna Chazinski.
My fact this week is that, according to the former head of the Russian anti-doping laboratory, male athletes take their drugs with whiskey, while female athletes take them with a martini. So these are the revelations that came out in a New York Times interview, first of all, last week. And this was the former head of the Russian anti-doping agency, who is called Dr. Rodchenko. And he talked about how actually he'd been systematically allowing athletes to do doping and then concealing it. And he said the reason he had to include alcohol in the samples was to speed up the absorption of the steroids and to shorten the detection window. And then I'm sure everyone is a chemist, so will understand exactly why alcohol does that. I don't need to go into the details there.
So now, you know, would you like your martini shaken, stirred, or full of drugs?
So who is this guy, the anti-doping Russian man?
Yeah, so this guy is Mr. Rodchenko, who was officially responsible during the Sochi Olympics in Russia for checking that athletes weren't doping. And he's just given this interview, which reads like an incredibly good John le Carré novel. It was made clear to him when he took the job that he would have to help athletes conceal their doping, according to this interview he gave. And so he said at night he'd receive, while in his laboratory, a signal that said the urines were ready, and he'd go into room 124, which was officially the storage space that they converted into a secret laboratory where they do all the stuff they're not supposed to be doing. And he would have all the urine of the athletes that he'd taken that was full of drugs, and he would go to a little hole in the wall, just at sort of foot level, and he'd slip that urine through that hole in the wall, and one of his colleagues on the other side would slip some clean urine that they'd taken off those athletes a few months earlier back through the hole in the wall, and he'd take that and replace it. Yeah, it's exciting stuff. You can see why he was drawn into it. I would have.
It's amazing. The other thing is that, so they've just announced they've had a massive drugs haul, but not a recent one. This is from the Beijing Games, 8 years ago. They've just announced, I think they got 31 athletes from 12 different countries, and this is because they've developed new tests in the last 8 years, and they still have the urine. So all around the world right now, they keep the urine for up to 10 years, and there are thousands of bottles of athletes' wee just on shelves in labs, just waiting to be retested.
This is an advert for stalkers out there. Maria Sharapova's 8-year-old urine exists somewhere. Track it down.
Poor
Yeah, so that is the problem. I read an article that said that the only the only kind of athletes that we catch are the ones that are doing things that are not that good. Because anyone who's doing anything any good, we're not nearly ready enough to catch them yet.
Yeah.
And that's why we're going through the Beijing guys now, and I think they're about to test a load of people from London 2012 as well.
Wow.
But I remember I read a book a while ago, and it was about the East Germans and the West Germans. And we all knew for a long time that the East Germans were doping. But it turns out that the West Germans were doping the whole time as well. And they were doing some really weird stuff. One of the things was they would pump air into the colons of swimmers to make them more buoyant.
No.
Yeah. But then these kind of things only came out in like the 21st century.
Wow, that's a long time for it to be in there.
Can we do a few things on drugs?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
No.
yeah.
some facts about drugs, maybe. So they've just found, Colombia's just had its biggest ever drug haul. Okay, absolutely massive, tons and tons of drugs. And I worked out how, I think it was 8 tons. I think it was 8 tons of
anything
drugs.
in particular, or?
I think it was cocaine.
Okay.
So 8 tons of cocaine. And I worked out that that would be enough to get every elephant on Earth high. Okay.
Wow.
Or the entire population of Bulgaria. Or the entire population of Wales very, very high.
And have they picked yet? Which they...
These drugs are worth £240 million, which would also buy you the entire Tottenham Hotspur squad.
Whoa. We need to move on really soon. So anything before we do?
I can tell you how useless sniffer dogs are at finding drugs.
What, from personal experience?
How was Colombia?
Congratulations on just buying Tottenham Hotspur as well.
This is a report that came out this week that sniffer dogs have been trained at Manchester Airport over the past couple of years to try and detect various bad substances that you shouldn't be smuggling into the country, but primarily drugs. That was a very high priority. And it turned out the dogs made multiple accurate detections, but most were of small amounts of cheese or sausages wrongly brought back by returning holidaymakers and posing minimal risk to the UK public health. They managed to detect 0 drugs.
Okay, it is time for our final fact of the show, and that is James Harkin.
Okay, my fact this week is that scientists have turned water into wine.
It's not traditionally the preserve of science either.
No, exactly.
Much more of a religious thing.
Yeah, exactly. So this is an article that I read in New Scientist this week. It's about 2 scientists called Mardon Chua and Alec Lee. And they work in a food lab in San Francisco, and they saw a wine that they couldn't really afford, and they thought, well, I would really want a wine that's just like that. They thought, well, we've got loads of chemicals here, why don't we just make it? And so they got a load of water and a load of ethanol, a load of flavorings and a few other things, and they've made something which kind of passes as wine. But this could be the future. This could be we're all drinking wine that's not made out of grapes.
Wow, yeah, that is amazing. Although putting a bunch of chemicals together into a drink sounds like the kind of thing that gets athletes into trouble.
And is it good? Do they know?
Sometimes it can be good. The original ones they tried weren't so good, so they put these different flavours in. So they have ethyl hexanoate, which smells like pineapple, butanoate, which is a bit like grape juice, limonene, which is a bit like lime, and acetoin, which is a bit like butter. And apparently one of the first attempts just tasted like melted butter.
Oh.
But it was alcoholic melted butter, so... But now they've managed to make one that kind of does taste a bit like a particular Italian wine.
In other science news, that sort of scientists performing miracles, the scientists this week have invented a magnet wrapped in pig intestines. What it is it's a pig intestine to make it more palatable to swallow that wraps up a magnet, and then when it goes down into your stomach, then the pig intestine unravels, and the magnet is supposed to attract magnetic materials in your stomach, and it's to deal with the 3,500 batteries that are swallowed by children every year in the US alone.
Wow.
And so the magnet will attach onto that and then drag it down out of your system and into the toilet. Plop, there you go.
Wow. I was looking into science news as well this week, and something came up this week which I really like. So Google have just patented a new invention, and this is it here. So basically they've invented a kind of sticky little thing to put on the front of the car, so that when you get hit by a car, rather than it lobbing you across the road, you just stick to the front of it. And you now travel with the car.
I mean, it doesn't seem like much of an improvement, really, does it? Well, I just imagine that car then rear-ending another car, and then that sticks to you.
It's a U sandwich with the cars and the bread.
But also, if someone hits the front of your car and your vision is obstructed because there's someone stuck to your car, you're much likelier to do that than hit another car.
I think the idea is that
Who thought of this?
Well, I think the idea is that they don't want you just to keep going. However, it is a great way to get to the hospital quickly, isn't it? You see tons of cars coming with humans.
Siri, I'm going to need you to book a servicing for the car.
I saw this patent as well because it was a little bit in the news, and then so I found a load of other patents that Google's done over the last few years. A system for after going to the gym, which takes you on a route home so that you don't bump into anyone you know. Because apparently you're going to smell really bad, and you're thinking, well, I don't really want to bump into anyone, so it deliberately takes you away from people.
And can this system be broadened to just all circumstances?
We should wrap up very soon. Do you guys have anything before we do?
I have one scientific story, but it's about penises, and I just wanted to apologise in advance. There's been a study done, and it's just come out this week. It's by the Australian National University, and it has been testing the theory that male fish with bigger genitals are more attractive. But the way they did this was to selectively breed mosquito fish over 8 generations to have either massive or tiny genitals. Yeah, and then they tested them, but only after they'd done 8 generations, and some had huge ones and others had tiny ones. By the way, the result of the study was that for mosquito fish anyway, females don't care and it doesn't affect paternity.
I read a version of that story in the Daily Mail, and they said that if the same ratio of penis to fish length was applied to humans to penis length, then it would mean the average 5'9" British man's penis would be slightly smaller than the average Scottish salmon.
Wow! We're going to need a bigger spanner.
Okay, that's it. That's all of our facts. Just time to share with you 4 stories that we didn't have time to cover. James?
Okay, my story is from the Manchester Evening News. A man is camping out in a McDonald's car park in Manchester in protest at not being allowed to use the drive-thru in his horse-drawn caravan.
Andy?
Mine is from the Daily Telegraph, and it is: research at Tel Aviv University and MIT has shown that half the people you consider friends don't actually like you.
Here's mine. This is from the BBC News. Uzbekistan. Due to a shortage of cash in the country's banks, teachers in the city of Nukus have been paid half as much as they are usually paid. And worse still, they were paid entirely in chickens. Anna?
This is from the Times. The French finance minister has admitted behaving inappropriately towards a female journalist, but has denied twanging her knickers.
And lastly, over to Jane Hill at Broadcasting House.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Jane. So that's all from Andy, James, Anna, and me, Bernard, apparently. We will be back again next week with a bunch more facts. See you then. Goodbye.